talk to me. I don't remember a word.
Hey, this is American Reckoning Podcast. I'm Paul. He's Aaron. We wanted to get on and get a podcast going today because of the Arlington Reconciliation Memorial being taken down, and a lot's happened in the last 48 hours. A lot's happened in the last couple of years since this little communist committee has been brought together to basically tear down an important memorial, which is a symbol of America and reconciliation. But we're also going to talk about this ass clown that removed a Christmas wreath in Winchester, Virginia. We'll get into that. And then there's something else in the naming commission that is also in this disgusting report. Naming commission. What did you call it? Communist naming committee.
Communist sanitizing committee.
The Communist Sanitization Committee of American History. So they go after, people don't realize this, they go after the 29th Infantry Division, the U.S. Army's 29th Infantry Division's patch, which is their it's called the yin and the yang. It's got a color of blue, kind of a Chinese symbol, yin and yang, whatever, but it's north and south, blue and the gray division. And they go after that. So we'll get into that on this episode. I think we're on episode 11 on American Reckoning Podcast. All right. So they are going to apparently a federal judge who actually was a Trump appointed judge. I don't know his name. Do you have his name or anything?
I don't know.
Alston. I think it's Rossi or Ronnie Alston or something. But anyway, he put an injunction, a temporary restraining order on the tearing down the removal of the memorial on Monday, and then late Tuesday today, I guess, or early this morning. This is being recorded on December the 20th. But he just lifted that injunction after he says he went over there and didn't see anything being disturbed in terms of the ground and the graves around the memorial. And so that allowed him to give an order to lift the injunction. So I don't even know I'll be honest with you, I'm not real sure as to what the legal grounds for Defend Arlington was to try to get this memorial stopped that allowed this judge to review it. Because, I mean, I don't quite understand if all he's looking at, if it hasn't disturbed anything, that's a very small basis for putting an injunction up. Whereas what they could have done is the whole freaking thing is unconstitutional. You know, this unelected naming commission put forth by the administrative state, the Department of Defense, and the United States Army.
That's exactly what it is.
So maybe we should think about that first, and let's just the whole precedent of how this little commie freaking naming commission came to be born. And they say out of course the turmoil in the country after the George Floyd incident, which is a total freaking lie to begin with. You know, here's this criminal, you know, that they threw this dude in jail over the rest, and he dies because he's having a freaking cardiac arrest, if anybody really wants to take a look at it. But that's just blown up by these commies in the press. And so everything is born from that. So anyway, the naming commission is created by Congress, by the really, really pathetic people that actually supposedly represent the people of the United States, the states. They basically endorse the Department of Defense through the Army to come up with a naming commission to remove Confederate symbols, names. You know, that you hear about the base names getting changed. You hear about the Confederate Reconciliation Memorial and many other monuments around the country. That's all born from this insanity. But really, it's just an inroad for them to go after American history. to overturn our culture, our heritage, our symbols, our way of life, everything, and to change it. And we'll read through some of the descriptions from a couple of left-wing articles too, that kind of describe their take on the meaning of this memorial and why it's they endorse it coming down. So, but I don't know. What are your thoughts so far on all this? Down to the memorial.
Well, I certainly agree with your sentiments earlier. Looking at this, the report by this naming commission, I'm only vaguely familiar with a few people on here, but one of these 8 people is General Ty Seidule, who was, I think, a historian at West Point, and he's one of those who have been. There's actually a picture of him close to the beginning of the report.
Up the picture while you're talking.
He's one of the ones that has been very vocal about Robert E. Lee, being a traitor, for example. That's kind of how he first got on my radar, because he started being very vocal about that, and saying everything related to Lee should come down, which, I mean, is completely incorrect. And for any member of the military to look back at a guy like Robert E. Lee and make that claim is not only factually incorrect, but it really undermines probably quite possibly the finest soldier ever produced in North America.
Which they want to remove. They don't want anybody to think that way. They want Robert E. Lee to be demonized. They want Robert E. Lee to be devalued.
Yes.
They want everything about his service, his manhood, his morals and ethics to be erased.
Yes.
They want him and this piece of dung, who probably never even served a day in combat. If I look at his stupid patches, this bald-headed freak. These are the communists on the naming commission.
Yep. These are your administrative
and apologize
leadership.
For me to be angry, but these people have no right. None. And Congress should be ashamed and disgusted with themselves to even allow something like this. These people are nobodies. They're nobodies. And they're deciding on such an incredibly important thing when it comes to history and the symbols and monuments which we hold, Americans hold, with high regard. They want to remove anything. It's not just the Confederacy, though.
It's all of our culture. It's all of our culture in general.
Our culture.
The communists,
American history and culture, right?
They need to remove, and of course, yet again, the Confederacy and the cultural influence in the United States from the South is the low-hanging fruit. Again, we see it.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier today. We've spoken to other veterans, but we've also spoken to people who are sympathetic to the Union cause. The Union won. Republican Lincoln is a hero. They have that mindset, and even some Union reenactors and people who we consider Yankees and stuff, and ask them, it's like, why, do you guys why don't you help some of the Confederate causes and to save some of these memorials and monuments and stand up and speak out about it? Because there's very little coming from that community. So the Union reenactors,
and strangely enough, they're a heritage, like a lot of those are heritage organizations whose original members funded a lot of these monuments themselves.
Very much so. And they were at the time, late 1800s, early 1900s, there was the spirit of reconciliation. But now so many people are silent. I mean, so many people, and it's like, look, I got news for you. You think this Confederate stuff, and as you just mentioned, Aaron, low-hanging fruit, as we all know, but they're coming for you. They want to, these commie pieces of filth And the Democrat Party, which is no longer the Democrat Party, I'm sorry. Anybody who's voting Democrat, you're really a communist, and you're voting for communism. And you're run by a bunch of Marxist philosophers who are intent on bringing like Chinese freaking communist, Maoist cultural revolution to the United States. You are watching it, and they're coming after your Yankee asses.
You're forgetting.
Union reenactors, all of you people sitting on the sidelines, you may sit there all comfy and secure and like, oh, well, it's only the Confederates. I guarantee you they're coming after you. It's coming to your neighborhood. They will remove all monuments of anything American, anything of value. And it's only a matter of time. I mean, they're not touching with this Arlington Reconciliation Memorial. They're not touching any of the graves, apparently, from what I can tell.
Yet.
Right now, they're not disinterring. They're not disturbing the ground of the, I think there's some 300 Confederate soldiers who were disinterred in the area of Washington, D.C., and then reinterred into Arlington, which stand around that section 16 where this memorial is. But they're not coming out of there yet. But I guarantee you, they set this precedent. They set this level of destruction. They will come after those graves. And let me tell you something too. Anybody who doesn't think, if I put a grave on my property, my private property here, because these fuckheads, they don't think about private property. They want to take private property. They don't believe in it. They are Marxists. And they just because, I have a Confederate flag, or I have Confederate ancestors, I have Confederate blood, and my great-great-great-granddaddy owned a slave, they will use that as justification to come get your private property. Don't you think you actually think it's not possible? I guarantee you it is. They can change the ball game, and they can come after you. If something as flimsy as some knee-jerk reaction in Congress that puts together in motion this diabolical naming commission by the unelected administrative state, the swamp that's a giant cesspool on all of us, these clowns can come after us anywhere. And they will come after Union graves too eventually. That's the point. So people have to, unfortunately, you and I have talked about this, but we've realized that this game has been sadly warped and over with for a long time. That is our country, in a lot of respects, the republic that was initially formed and so on. But some people have sort of given up the fight and just and almost want to say, just let it fall, just let it fall down. And what do you think? I mean, I'm not of that sort of vein. I just can't sit there and
no.
There's it's overwhelming though. So much going on, it's almost mind-boggling, and it's so disheartening. And so you try to find the strength and the ability we have the ability to discern. You're hoping that other people have the ability to discern right and wrong, what's moral and immoral, what's ethical and unethical.
Kind of to your point, I think a lot of just like the laymen out there who really aren't into history and kind of might see these types of things, the monuments coming down, in their periphery. It's not really part of their world. A lot of them probably like to think they are standing for what is good and probably don't think it's a problem they come down because of the way they were raised and their common understanding. Guys like you and I, we're history nerds. We spend a lot of time getting into historical subjects and parsing out the details. And you and I actually have enough of an understanding to actually have a relatively informed opinion on these things, whereas your average person doesn't. And that's problem number one. If you were a good student and just went to school, and got your good grades, you have an understanding of this conflict that frames it completely incorrectly. And that's why it's interesting. You read these articles on these monuments coming down, and you see the way everything is framed. It's all framed as a war entirely about slavery. And that's the problem, is it was not a war entirely about slavery. Slavery was an incidental part of it. It certainly had its place there. But as I've said before, this conflict would have happened without slavery being the catalyst that it was, or at least something would have come to a head at some point. And that's the big problem, is everybody says, what's the problem? The South was fighting purely for slavery. Anything they stand for must be completely evil. And these monuments are old enough to be historic evidence of the contrary. These monuments themselves speak the truth about what happened then. And they're not propaganda, but they're after the fact to try and justify it, like so many things that have been done to justify the North's invasion of the South. And so that's the problem, is even your average person, even people with whom we might agree on most other things, in their mind, this was a war totally for slavery. And that's one of the hardest things to get around with these monuments coming around. Everybody thinks this is a good thing. This was evil and we can put it behind us, is what their attitude is. And that is completely incorrect. These are not only reconciliation monuments, but they're also one of our last links to Jeffersonian America.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And I'll kind of leave it at that for the moment.
No, you're right. I mean, you're not getting in schools, even 30, 40 years ago, when most people, even an older generation in their 50s, 60s now, they taught the Civil War as the Civil War, even in the South, as a victory for the Union, for the United States, and a victory over the Confederacy, which was labeled as slave owning and, from that lens. It's all through the lens of slavery, and the moral high ground was given to the Union side through the Lincoln Republican perspective. And that is how people view things. Not understanding, as you just mentioned, the South was not fighting over slavery. Now, you have to look at the whole picture. Sometimes the winning side is not the moral victor. It may appear that, because you have a lot in the books, you have a lot of propaganda, the winning side gets to tell the story, and the Civil War is the quintessential example of that. And it's happened in history before. There's been other victories, where the right side kind of didn't win.
The more just side,
the more just side. And the South, yes. It's unbelievable. They say that the South was a slave-owning society, Yet if you look at how the Southerners felt, they're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, we had slaves, but so did the North. And not only that, there were maybe 5 to 10%, somewhere in there, I don't know the exact figures, of soldiers who went to war. Well, soldiers specifically, there may be 5% of the soldiers actually even owned slaves. They were not fighting over slavery. As we've spoken to many times. And I don't know how many people in businesses across the South, but it was the minority. There were still a lot of shop owners and blacksmith and farmers and people who did not own slaves. So it was not a slave-owning society. But that has been forced onto the perspective of what Southerners were, what they were all about, what their culture was, and what they were fighting over. That is complete rubbish.
It has to be. It has to be. Think about how costly, I mean, to the Northern perspective, think about how costly that war was. It is still, to this day, our bloodiest war in the in the U.S. That we've ever fought. And you know, and everybody went into it half cocked, thinking it would be over with quickly, and of course it ends up being drawn out and lasting years. And it's interesting. You can see the political changes when you study the history of the war, just like you would today. You know, it's kind of like everybody had all these opinions once they got started, and then once it starts to become really costly, they start to interject these other things and politically maneuver, and we see exactly. And we could do a whole podcast just on that.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to delve into that aspect of the war, but I mean, they have to make it the most important thing ever, when in truth, even during the war, and even after the war, a lot of the northern states started to get right ticked off when they saw that they basically gave up their state's Republican form of government, as a consequence of this war. And so there were echoes of that afterwards.
The 14th Amendment and things started to go downhill quickly right after the war, all in the name of this. And again, it was one of these knee-jerk reaction situations, just like you're seeing right now, where people's liberties are being taken away. Yes, slavery was bad. It would have died on its own. But the Southerners looked at it as like the cost was much higher to lose the state's ability to decide, the people of the states to decide, not the federal government, not Lincoln's government at the time. That's what they were willing to die over. They were absolutely overwhelmed in terms of numbers and resources and material, yet they still wanted to fight. And now, as an example, I want to bring this up right here on this page. This commission, they said they went into the survey, but this speaks to the crux of how the demonization and outright removal, in a symbolic way, so the commission recommends that the patch. This is the yin and the yang, the 29th Infantry Division, which is part of this naming commission. It's not just the Reconciliation Memorial that's changing. The commission recommends that the patch symbol remain unchanged, but that the heraldry description change by one, removing the language that implies Confederate service and reconciliation of the North and South. So after the war, the Confederates would eat crow, bite their tongue, swallow the reconciliation pill, and try to get on with their lives and their businesses because their land had been wrecked. And now, agreeing to that, they're betrayed yet again by this behemoth federal government, by these pigs. They're Marxist freaking pigs, and nobody's doing anything about it. And this is yet another example. They're going to change the entire symbolism of this 29th Infantry Division patch. The 29th Infantry Division, if I recall, won 3 presidential unit citation awards. So the lineage goes back to the Confederate times, but they want that removed. They don't want the reconciliation. The 29th Infantry Division was made up of units from Virginia mainly, but also into Maryland and Pennsylvania. And then also modifying the language to reflect the rich history of the 29th Infantry Division, with focus now on unification of American citizens through service in the 29th. What the hell does that mean? That's about as plain and that's like a big glob of silly putty, a bunch of crap is what that is. That says and means nothing.
It's complete lip service, because they would say that on one hand, while on the other hand, talking about how diverse and multicultural they are. Right. And the problem is you can't have both. I've got no problem with other cultures, other races, and I've got no problem with them in the United States. What I do have a problem with is the idea that we should be promoting everybody not becoming part of a common culture, which is exactly what multiculturalist ideology espouses. It doesn't make us stronger, it makes us weaker. And that's the problem. That's one of the reasons why they're doing this, is because they're trying to make room for all of these other cultures. I mean, think about how few people I mean, it's, what is it, estimated that maybe 80 million Americans have Confederate heritage. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
that's not even half anymore. And furthermore, you have so many people who came in after, you know, whether it be the Italians or whoever, you know, in the later 1800s into the early 1900s, and, you know, in New York and wherever else. And they have very little connection to this at all, you know, except by name, because they're now Americans. You know, this is only part of their kind of cultural heritage. They don't have any connection to it at all. And because really, in my opinion, the United States isn't melting together at the speed at which it would need for a lot of this stuff to work. All these different cultures not only don't care about Southern heritage, they don't care about American culture. And they're just as happy to replace it, you know, as they get in a few generations and are more and more part of our country. Anyway, more to come.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I was looking at some pictures of the memorial, and it's just you know, it's such a beautiful memorial too. And that's another thing they want to destroy, aside from the fact that, you know, it's just you know, I'm bringing it up here, but the artwork and the meaning behind it is so, it's just such a beautiful thing. And it's such a beautiful thing to be in Arlington. So they want to remove that too. They want to remove these pieces of art that are beautiful, more than just the symbolism. They just, you know, they would rather put a monolith, you know, almost like the 2001 A Space Odyssey, you know, where you've got this worthless piece of granite that has no art on it, and may just have a few of these woke words on it, and that is the new beautiful symbol to these Marxists, a monument to nothingness. But it's, you know, I don't know. They're not going to stop here. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. That's the whole point of this. So they take down this memorial, they're going to go for others. They're going to get they're going to be they're not going to be satiated by just that. They're going to keep coming.
There never comes a time where it stops. That's one of the problems with a lot of the Republicans who might otherwise have stopped this. You know, you have a lot of these 1865 14th Amendment Republicans out there, and they basically have the same argument as the leftists do these days. They just think that the amount of change has already happened enough. It should have stopped a while back, and we've gone far enough. But the left, the revolution never stops. There will never be a point where they say, okay, the wounds of the past are now healed. We have now, you know, purged all of these connections that made us evil. Now we're totally good. That's never going to happen. That's not the way these types of movements work. They just keep going and going until terrible things happen, you know. And, you know, given that these type of leftist movements have been responsible for tens, if not, you know, potentially a couple 100 million deaths in the 20th century, which kids in college are not learning these days. Stalin, you know, and all these things these people did. You know, that's where this all heads in the end. Yeah. Eventually, what comes to happen, you can see rumblings of it already. They say, look, our perfect society is totally within our reach. We can totally achieve this. The only thing that's stopping us are these people who are not letting the utopia occur. If it weren't for these people, in this case, the Southerners, but you know, you could fill in a whole bunch of modern people that these leftists would like to get rid of, and that's what they do. They do exactly what murderers throughout history have done. They dehumanize, they vilify, and then they ultimately remove and exterminate where they can. And
and you see, you know, these Marxists, they always kill the status quo. That's part of their thing until they get to their perfect utopia. So all of the useful dumbasses who basically are the woke idiots from the universities and, you know, going out there acting like friggin' idiots. And so these Marxists always look to eat their own and go after the useful idiots who are the woke little ambassadors out there. Unbeknownst to them, they're going to be eaten. It's just a matter of time. But let me show you a picture of a typical ass clown who this guy, this 2 days ago on December 17th, he took a Christmas wreath from a Confederate statue at the old courthouse in Winchester. And this guy took it, and we think he may have stolen it last year, because the same thing happened in broad daylight. Well, it's actually raining, but it's, daytime.
Right. And it's a pretty crowded area too.
It's a very crowded. This is the pedestrian mall in Winchester, Virginia. If any of y'all have been there, it's always busy, even, it's bad weather. There's cameras everywhere. So, but thank God that at least the Winchester police are looking into it. But this is an example of real hatred. He hates the Confederate statue so much that his little top-hatted, caped, umbrella-wearing freak show self decided, I'm going to go steal that Christmas wreath off of that statue. And I think of the ignorance and the hatred of him, that he's willing to commit a crime. And I know it's not a big crime. It's petty larceny, as cops would say. But the symbolism, the Marxists, I'm talking about the Biden, Obama, Klaus Schwab, the real globalist freak shows, the real jackasses holding the puppet strings, will sit there and they will throw this guy in the gulag someday. He's a useful idiot. They really want to change society into a one world government. America will not exist anymore. That's their end goal. And these kinds of useful idiots are just, there's so many people like this. And they have they're the guys who are warped into their education, a messed up educational system, and they don't have any idea what they're doing.
Yeah. This guy also looks rather eccentric. And I will point out, you mentioned the one world government. A lot of people might think a lot of their conservative representatives might be against that, but actually there are plenty of people, both who are liberal and conservative, who believe in big one world government. They're called Hobbesians, after Hobbes, Leviathan Hobbes, the topic for another time.
Yeah.
And so really it's not just one side that's pulling for this. The philosophy is that you have less chaos, you work against the forces of anarchy, as Lincoln actually put it. Lincoln actually portrayed the secession as anarchy. That's a Hobbesian point of view. The whole idea is
but that's because Lincoln too, as even this guy with a top hat, imagine the irony, had a distorted or fundamentally incorrect view of what the true founding fathers of liberty wanted. The Jeffersons, the George Masons, the Patrick Henrys. They did not want a central government. They did not want that, and Lincoln did. And these people think like Hobbes. They think that way. They believe the centralized power should be the authority, not individual people.
Well,
it's that simple.
You actually named those in the founding generation who were not Hobbesian. They were Aristotelian, and guys like Jefferson, so much so that he is kind of on the list of people like Aristotle, who really were going for a real republican form of government, lowercase r, and anyway, go ahead.
No, it's just agreeing. I think that's, I'm so animated and excited today. I'm just so freaking pissed off. I just cannot believe. I mean, my whole Army service, I want to just throw it away. I want to burn my uniform. I want to burn the flag they gave. I want to burn my service record. I just am so ashamed of being associated with the Army, and
especially what it's become.
It's such a, people may not think much of this memorial, this thing, or where it is in Arlington, where, you know, I was born in Virginia, in Arlington, but most of my family's from Southwest Virginia. But you know, it just hits that it hits home, you know, to the symbolism of that is just devastating. And I don't think people really realize, well, some do. Some do. A lot of people who think like us, but others are just, you know, it's just the Confederate crap again.
Right.
You know, it's never going to really touch us. And yeah, I'm here to tell you it will.
You know, this could be a bad analogy, but you know, every time in Virginia they want to throw a new tax on tobacco or something, nobody really stands up and says anything, because, you know, it's really hard to, you know, say, oh, the government shouldn't try and control our behavior for what is a bad habit, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not a good analogy, because the type of history we're talking about isn't a vice. You know what I mean?
Right.
It isn't something like that. But like you were saying, it's kind of on people's periphery, and they don't know much about it. What they do know, they generally find unfavorable, you know, and that's incorrect. You know, just the perceptions of what went on then, and just so much about this. The average understanding is just so poor, and the way we're educated on this period. Actually, most of our history is just so poor. I mean, it's just a joke. I mean, it's really an insult to any intelligent person that goes through the school system.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this earlier too. This notion that in order to get people to see the way our perspective, which is steeped in the early early founders, the Articles of Confederation, some of the early Virginians and others, not just Virginia, who really, really, really understood this Enlightenment aspect of individual liberty, getting away from the monarchies, the feudal systems, and everything that came before, and focusing on that is where the real power is. It's really with the people, the true people. And that no matter the conversation, they must have been knocking their heads against the wall, trying to talk to like Alexander Hamilton or that other idiot, Edmund Barry, whatever his name was. I can't remember all the names, but
Hamilton's
a lot of the Federalists, and even James Madison, who eventually turned, and even George Washington. These were, they must have been like, wait, whoa, hold time out. Don't go down the central government road, man.
Well, yeah,
that leads to just monarchy, which we just freaking fought a war over.
Well, at their time, and I'm not trying to defend them, but they actually had a reason for thinking the way they thought. It wasn't just out of the blue. I mean, first off, these types of systems were the only things they really knew in recent history, and you had all these European states at the time forming, you know, the bases for what are now the modern nation states in Europe. And they thought, you know, the United States should be one of these. And you know, guys like Hamilton, who, you know, were around for the Revolution, you know, remembered soldiers without any shoes and all that kind of stuff. And they thought this kind of crony capitalism, big government in bed with business was the way to go, because you wanted your rich people to pay for what the government wanted to do. Now, that does not withstand the criticism that we are leveling against it. You know, the idea that individual liberty, like you were saying, is important, and the only way to really preserve that is what is still done in Switzerland largely today, and was done up until at least the end of Jeffersonian America in the early 1860s, and that was basically by limiting the government's ability to raise and spend money.
And that, or having, not only, when you say limit, what you're talking about is not only the monetary limit and funds, but also a time period. So you can raise this amount for a year or 3 years or
Right.
5 years,
Right.
and then it's off and everybody buys in. But remember, that takes discernment. It takes moral and ethical courage,
Right.
and foresight to be able to put a restraint on yourself.
Yes.
People to where the people diverged from that, and they did not have that restraint. You began to see in the founding fathers, who wanted a much bigger central government, and that would eventually ratify the Constitution, or some in absentia. They wanted more central government.
Yes. Yes.
And then after the Constitution was ratified, they didn't stop there. They wanted more and more.
Well, yeah, and you had a whole.
There you lead to that. See, people have to look at it from that perspective, and then it led to the Civil War because they were so.
Yes.
The Southern, especially in the South, it affected the Southerners the most because they believed in that.
Yes. Well, there were lots of mechanics behind the political problems between the sections at the time. But even in the founding generation, you had a cadre, including Supreme Court Justice John Marshall, who ruled that the states didn't ratify the Constitution, and gave which is complete nonsense. I think it's Article 7 that says specifically when this number of states, people can go read it. He said, no, that's not what it means, and so you've had these people trying to take away the states and trying to put the collective in place of the states from the beginning. And Dr. Livingston points out something very important. We've inherited both of these cultural traditions, which do not mesh at all. It goes back to the founding, And I don't know if he said this, but others have, in some way we're still fighting the federalist, anti-federalist kind of argument in one way or another over and over ever since. And some of that is steeped in just human nature. Some people, like I've been saying, love to be governed or love to govern others, and other people like to be left the hell alone. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they have a more innate desire, and it's in their blood or whatever, that they just leave me the hell alone. I don't need a government. And if I need a government, or we all need a bunch of people, let's get together and have a little government for a temporary period of time and limit it, and that's it.
Well, yeah.
But if you create this behemoth, that behemoth, like a giant cancer, continues to grow.
Yes,
and then it continues to corrupt.
It doesn't know when to stop growing.
Business involved and corporations involved in the government, which we have today, which Mussolini called fascism, the true meaning of fascism. But then you have these nitwits who don't know anything calling Republicans and conservatives fascists, and they don't even know what the hell it means.
Well, anyway, yes, and so, there's go ahead.
And one other thing is, we talked about this. When you finally realize that you can admit through your education, through your career, whatever, you have what we call the come to Jesus moment. And it is a profound thing that happens. And we all go through, because we all grew up in our education system, public school, learning about the Civil War and who was right and who was wrong, right? And you had a notion that, you were living in this United States that was very moral and ethical, and we were on the right side, and that's a good thing. And
right.
And you want to believe that.
And
but
that
not all of that is
right. That we are a story of continuity. That's the other thing. We have had continuity from the founding. I just wanted to put that in, but go ahead.
Correct. It's not the city on, the yellow brick road leading to the city on the shining hill, a nice, neat story there. And believe it or not, the anxiety and the stresses of today and the angst in our society is based on a lot of those things that they were dealing with 200 years ago, 230 years ago. And when you finally look at the education, you look at the what happened 230 years, and you follow it, and you have to make time to do it. Look at the other side of the coin, or the other side of the other side of things, and make a discerning determination. But when that happens, you realize that you could be wrong. A lot of the suppositions that you've had, a lot of the preconceived notions of American republicanism, the American way, our culture and heritage, that bends towards, I guess, justice, as they say, is not that way. And it's not what you think it is. It's not because of slavery. It's not because of these things that have been, these little breadcrumbs that have been laid before you to distract you. Those are easy to denounce. The bigger problem is the real foundational things that make us who we are as humans, and whether we want to be governed or not. Right. And what that really means, and the establishment of the systems and institutions that make up history as we go forward. And we don't have a lot of history here, so it's not difficult. But you have to have a come to Jesus moment if you're still believing that you're not affected, that this memorial being taken down, the Reconciliation Memorial and many others, the naming, all these name changes and stuff, that this is, if you're confused and you're weirded out by that, which you should be, and you had better take a look at the South's perspective of things, and there you will find, go back to the Civil War, which the Southerners call the War of Southern Independence. They tried to get out of this unholy union that was being forced upon them.
Well, and they were invaded, by the way. They didn't. And
they were invaded. They wanted to secede, which was constitutional. It was absolutely constitutional. You may have had a disagreement, but the reasoning that Lincoln used to keep them from seceding is everything about that war. Everything.
He argued the states were like counties.
The states were like counties.
They were not independent political societies.
And he had no interest in freeing slaves. This whole thing about slavery that you see these jackasses on the naming commission bringing up all the time, slavery and the Confederacy, all of this shit. It's all designed to obfuscate and to smokescreen from what really is the issue. And that is real freedom, the ability of the states to decide on what they can do. And let me tell you one more thing about morality. And you can talk about abortion, the act of abortion, whatever. And I don't give a crap, because I'll go there. What the justices decide, and this is an example when you're even talking about slavery back then, because slavery was legal at the time. So there's a moral question, okay? That at least on the North side, they made it into a moral argument to fit their political gain. Abortion today, as it was just made, abortion was not like a lot of the nitwits think. Even though I have a moral thing against abortion, but what the justices did is they sent it back to the states. It's like if Massachusetts or New York or California or Oregon and your left-wing policies and people want to make abortion on demand all the way up until the point of birth, then you go right the hell ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right.
You take that moral leap and you do that. Okay, but there's other states who say, no, I don't want that. But it's left up to the people. It's left up to the states. That is an incredibly important thing to always remember. And when that's taken away and you have an unelected naming commission who decides this, that, and the other thing, you are going down a bad road, man. That is pure Marxism. and the sick publications out there in the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, CBS, and all these, they should know better, but they're so stinking Marxist now that they do not have the ability to discern, or they don't care. They've already bought into the globalist Marxist bullshit, and it's over for them. You know, they're like seduced into it, and they cannot discern anymore.
Yeah.
But so when you look back at slavery, you look back at the Civil War, you'll start to see that this has nothing to do with, what is it about slavery? That's a political issue. That had nothing to do with the.
Real quick, I'd like to make a comment on a little bit of, a lot of historians and will know this, but there were 10 or 20 times more anti-slavery societies in the South up until the early 1830s. And what started to turn them off was the radical abolitionist movement that came out of New England, kind of out of the blue,
trying to tell them what to do, and from the moral aspect.
Not just telling them what to do. There was this tendency back when New England states were threatening secession during, say, War of 1812, and a lot of this happened kind of following the War of 1812, where they started to vilify Southerners, not because of slavery, but Southerners because they were Southern. And they started these campaigns where they'd write books on Southerners and all this kind of stuff, just talking about how, slovenly and evil and just talking this trash because of their political disagreements. Very similar to what you see New Englanders doing today, I might add, or those of the New England tradition. And not to disparage all of them, I got some relatives up there, but
hopefully, yeah. And there's a lot of New Englanders who, maybe today are very conservative and actually have had that come to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
And actually can discern, like, wait a minute, those Southerners had a point. In fact, they were dead right.
Yeah.
South was right. They just lost the war. They lost the war to this.
Right. And a lot of people think it's really troubling to hear comments by Supreme Court Justice like Scalia. I've heard anecdotes where he would say something like, well, that was decided by the war, or they'll make an offhand comment, about a subject. And that's really troubling to me, because that implies that they subscribe to the medieval ethic of might makes right, trial by combat. And if you win, that means God. It is.
It's intellectually lazy.
The idea
that was already decided by this. I don't need to really talk about that.
The idea that ideas are settled at the point of a sword or a gun is the problem there. You don't resolve anything. Just because one side dominates another doesn't resolve anything. The only way things become resolved, which I don't know if they ever truly do, but the only way we can navigate this as individuals is by reconciling the ideas with each other. And they're not going to mesh in a lot of areas, and it's tough to navigate sometimes. But you don't solve these but through domination. You don't solve problems through coercion. You don't exterminate people today to have a better tomorrow. I mean, this is ridiculous.
It's the failing of man and a moving away from God and Jesus. And you're trying to settle things in an arrogant way through force of arms. And believe me, I know force of arms and all that, but it is not the best way. It should be absolute last resort. And in most cases, in almost all cases, a revolution may be an exception, and certainly the War of Southern Independence was an exception. When your back's against the wall and you're being invaded, and a tyrant is upon you, you have to discern right and wrong, and you must.
Quick though, to your point, the Southern states that seceded were more justified in their secession at the time they did it than the colonies were at the time they seceded from England under the king.
That's right. Yeah.
That's very important. Yes, I mean, there was a sovereign during that. They actually did break away, contrary to tradition, but secession had been part of the tradition in the states in the time before the war. It had been espoused by Jefferson himself, and I'll let people look this up. The administration immediately preceding Lincoln, who was still in office for months, they didn't go to war. They weren't making moves to go to war at all.
Right.
It wasn't until Lincoln got in there that they committed.
Lincoln had a plan.
He did.
I fully believe that there were people in his administration that were also totally on board, and they said, "Look, this is the time. Let's do it."
Yeah.
And they.
Yep. And he skillfully manipulated the South into firing. But it's very important to realize that they committed the act of war by blockading.
Yeah, but the secession. Yeah, you're right. The secession. It was already talked about in the War of 1812. I mean, the Hartford Convention. The people in the North also wanted to secede.
I forget which time it was.
About secession, it was like not a big deal. But Lincoln used that.
Jefferson actually said, "Let them go." During one of the New England, one of the many.
He said it's not the best thing, but the Constitution doesn't preclude them from wanting to go.
Right, and the federal government has no authority to coerce a state back in. This was pretty commonly understood beforehand. That's the other thing. Every once in a while, you'll get somebody who doesn't, who wants to act like they're above the slavery argument, but yet will try and make an argument that the secession was illegal, which is actually, I think, a much harder thing to prove because there is much more clear evidence on that. That's widely available.
Yeah. Well, I think let's go ahead. We could probably keep talking on and on about this.
Sure.
We'll just keep this somewhat short. But I mean, I think I'll leave us at this, and that's to say, it's almost like the outcome of the war, the Civil War, where, I don't know where I saw this quote. It was a meme or something, but, the Southerners lost the war, but gained God, closer to God. And the Union, the Northerners, won the war, but lost God. And I think that's what's happening with this Reconciliation Memorial. And I think that these people think they're winning, but they're losing their souls. They're trying to force us to live in a country, in a world where there is no more moral, ethical. They make the moral and ethical decisions, not from the people.
But they are God. Government is God.
They're God. They believe, the administrative state now believes that they are God, and that we are just nothing, really. There is nothing for us, and the little pieces of property and pieces of our lives that we hold on to, they may be coming for that as well. Because once they take your history, your culture, your heritage, your way of life, they're already taking our money. What else do you have left? So I'm hoping it's a wake-up call that people look at this memorial coming down as a much more dire situation, and because it is, and people should see it for what it is. So, hey, thanks. This American Reckoning podcast, and we'll have this up on YouTube and our YouTube channel and Rumble as well. We'll upload that hopefully here later this evening or tomorrow. So that's it. Hey, thanks, Aaron.
All right, man. We'll see you.
I have nothing for myself.